When planning our trip to Italy, it was the possibility of seeing Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper in person that convinced me that Milan had to be on our itinerary. I was surprised to find that one of the world's most famous paintings was held in the refectory of a relatively small basilica, Santa Maria delle Grazie. Chances are that even if you don't know much about art history, you are familiar with this painting in one form or another. It has been copied and parodied hundreds, if not thousands of times by admiring artists, pop culture, and even pop art. Andy Warhol's final works were actually based on Da Vinci's take on this biblical theme, and his series debuted in Milan in 1987. CNN named this mural as the second most famous painting in the world, the first being Da Vinci's other well-known work, the Mona Lisa. Not bad for a guy who only has about 20-something paintings to his name. It was revitalized in pop culture through Dan Brown's fictional work, The Da Vinci Code, which has seemed to spawn a bevy of conspiracy theories, and more recently at the 2024 Paris Olympics with its controversial opening ceremony. The work that Da Vinci completed in 1498 is still fresh in the minds of millions, and it shows no signs of going away. So if this is one of the most significant pieces of art you could possibly see, why wouldn't you? Well, according to art history professor James Beck, only about 20% of Da Vinci's original painting is still on the wall of the refectory. The long history of damage, destruction, and failed restoration attempts gives reasonable rise to the question, then what is it that I'm really looking at? I argue that its history of deterioration and restoration is just as fascinating and important as the content itself. It begins with Leonardo refusing the traditional mural technique of fresco, meaning fresh, and opting for a painting material called tempera. This choice of material allowed the use of colors that are not possible with fresco, but more importantly, it allowed him to take as much time as he needed. The fresco technique requires paint to be applied very quickly before it dries, thus requiring large portions to be completed in a short amount of time, and Da Vinci was certainly not known for his speed. This painting took 3 years to complete, and probably would have taken longer had Ludovico Sforza not called for his contract to be renegotiated with a required deadline. This non-fresco mural really didn't begin well. It was painted on a thin wall filled with moisture-retaining rubble on the opposite side of a kitchen. The humidity from the heat and moisture of cooking caused the tempera not to adhere properly. As a result, less than 60 years after the painting was completed, the 16th century painter and art historian Giorgio Vasari described the painting as being reduced to a muddle of blots, and the figures were no longer recognizable. Here is a review of events affecting the physical structure of this painting. Keep in mind that all of these events happened even after the painting had become described as a muddle of blots. In 1652, a doorway was cut through Jesus' feet. In 1726, oil paint was added to fill in missing sections and the whole mural was varnished. In 1768, a curtain was hung over the painting to protect it. Instead, it trapped moisture. When the curtain was finally pulled away, it took some paint with it. In 1770, another restoration was attempted, in which the previously added oil was removed, and a virtually unknown painter repainted much of the mural. He repainted all but 3 faces before public outrage demanded his firing. In 1796, soldiers during the French Revolution used the refectory as a horse stable and threw stones at the painting. They also scratched out the eyes of the disciples. In 1821, a fresco removal expert tried to move the painting to a safer location, badly damaging the center section before realizing that Leonardo's work was not actually a fresco. He then attempted to reattach damaged sections with glue. From 1901 to 1908, and in 1924, the painting was studied and cleaned. Some parts were also stabilized with stucco. Then, after some attempt at maintenance, the refectory was bombed in 1943 during World War II. A wall of sandbags was assembled to protect both the Last Supper painting and the fresco on the opposite end of the refectory. In 1978, a major restoration began which took 21 years to complete. By the 1970s, the paint had deteriorated badly and a great intervention was launched. The intent was to stabilize the painting and reverse damage caused by previous restoration attempts, dirt, and pollution. This restoration attempt was much more scientifically advanced than any of the previous cleanings and stabilizations. Infrared, reflectoscopy, and microscopic core samples were used to determine the original form of the painting. Areas that were deemed unrestorable were repainted with watercolor in more subdued colors to indicate the parts that are not Leonardo's original work. When you examine the painting closely with this in mind, it's easy to see that the estimate of 20% of original content seems like an accurate assessment. So this begs the question, is the mural we see in the refectory of Santa Maria della Grazie today anywhere near what Leonardo originally painted? Is it anywhere close to what he wanted his viewers to experience? The answer is probably no. In addition to the sunlight being blocked from shining on the characters of the painting, the original luminosity and dynamic range has mostly been lost and can only be imagined by observing Da Vinci's other works. However, he was traditionally an oil painter, which allowed him to completely master the effects of chiaroscuro. It's hard to say if The Last Supper had the same intensity with tempera as his oil canvas paintings. In my opinion, what makes seeing The Last Supper such an extraordinary experience is that even though the brilliance of his lighting and blending techniques have all but faded away, the content of this painting still speaks strongly, in spite of deterioration, despite botched removals, despite cleanings, restorations, and stabilizations, despite being bombed. It still lives today to be the most famous and extraordinary representation of the Last Supper that has ever been painted. Only 1 year after Da Vinci completed The Last Supper, Ludovico Sforza, the man who commissioned the painting, lost his sovereignty to King Louis XII, who fortunately commissioned a copy of Leonardo's painting because it couldn't be safely moved to France. It is suspected that Da Vinci actually painted the characters of Jesus and John in this copy, dated to around 1520 AD, about 20 years after the original and around the time of Leonardo's death. Another copy also exists, which gives us another reference point for how to imagine Da Vinci's original vision. When we compare the two copies and how the mural looked in 1975 with what is on the wall of the refectory today, we can see that so much of what the painting expressed centuries ago still remains, even if the precision of the images has faded. There were many paintings of the Last Supper long before Da Vinci ever touched a brush, but he chose to paint it in a way that had never been done before. He identified the most impactful and intense moment within the night that the Blessed Sacrament was first presented. It was the moment that Jesus informed his disciples that one of them would betray him. These 12 men who left their lives, living and traveling together, who witnessed Jesus performing miracles and healings, who held the belief and hope that this was the coming Messiah, who would restore and rule over all of Israel. In this very night of Passover, the celebration of Yahweh Elohim freeing their ancestors from slavery and taking them out of Egypt, Jesus announces not just that this Passover would be his last, but being troubled in spirit also says, "Truly I say to you, that one of you will betray me." Da Vinci captures the chaos of this moment. Each and every disciple, being deeply grieved, say to him, "Surely not I, Lord," including the very person who allowed Satan to enter him and fill his heart with greed and betrayal. The disciples, unsuspecting of Judas, begin to express their grief and inquisition. The disciple whom Jesus loved is pulled away from laying on Jesus' chest by Simon Peter, whispering in his ear, "Tell us who it is of whom he is speaking." John leans back onto Jesus' chest and asks, "Lord, who is it?" And Jesus answers, "The hand of the one betraying me is with mine on the table." Judas is portrayed as extending his hand onto the table at the same time as Christ, thus confirming by Jesus' own words that Judas is the betrayer. He reaches for the bread while being distracted by the inquiry of Peter to John. He also is shown clutching a coin purse as an icon for holding the disciples' money box, as well as the 30 pieces of silver he received in exchange for betraying Jesus. In previous paintings of the Last Supper, Judas is often identified by being seated on the other side of the table from the rest of the disciples, while also being the only one without a halo. In Da Vinci's painting, he cleverly seats Judas lower than all of the other disciples, with his head turned away from the windows of the refectory such that the literal light never shines on his face. As Peter is whispering in John's ear, he is also seen clutching a knife, foreshadowing the events in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he cuts off the ear of one of the high priest's slaves. A fun detail that shows Da Vinci's awareness of the biblical accounts can be seen in the likeness of the man sitting to the left of Peter. This is Andrew, Peter's brother, and as you can see, they actually have a sibling-like appearance. The same can be seen with James and John with style, color, and parting of their hair. John is painted in a feminine manner, as Da Vinci often did with youthful males. This can be seen in his St. John the Baptist painting, as well as Salvator Mundi. It also appears that John mirrors Jesus' clothing, which perhaps indicates a special bond or closeness. John referred to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved, and is recognized as the beloved disciple. James, being given the nickname Son of Thunder, must have had a fiery personality, indicated by a time when he and his brother John asked Jesus if they should call down fire to burn the people that did not receive Jesus. It's no surprise or coincidence that Da Vinci painted him significantly more disgruntled than the rest of the disciples. Da Vinci, showing his attention to biblical details, placed James and John on either side of Jesus, referencing the passage where the mother of the sons of Zebedee asked Jesus to command that in your kingdom these two sons of mine may sit one at your right and one on your left. Thomas is seen clearly pointing upward with the index finger on his right hand. This was a common gesture in religious paintings throughout that era and can even be seen in two of Da Vinci's other paintings, St. John the Baptist and the Burlington House cartoon. Raphael even depicted Da Vinci himself with the same gesture in the School of Athens painting. Usually this symbol is understood as pointing toward the heavens, which means affirming a divine authority or power. Da Vinci knew this well, and it would have been fitting for any of Jesus' disciples, other than Judas, to use this gesture. But Leonardo cleverly extended the symbolism by choosing Thomas for this pose. As we find out later on in the story, it was with Thomas's finger that he confirmed his belief in the divinity of Christ by placing it in the holes of Jesus' hands when seeing him for the first time after the resurrection. Da Vinci balances the intense emotion and chaotic gestures by anchoring the painting on Christ, who forms a stabilizing shape in the true center of the painting. Jesus creates the shape of a triangle with his arms, which was a common structure of Renaissance paintings. We see this with Da Vinci's Madonna on the Rocks and Raphael's Transfiguration. The red and blue tunic adorning Jesus is purposely bicolored to represent the duality of his humanity and divinity. The red represents the flesh, and the blue represents the spirit. These were originally colored with vermilion and lapis lazuli, which were achieved by crushing and grinding the stone into a powder and mixing them into the tempera paint. Jesus' solemn and perhaps sorrowful demeanor is an expression of his grief for what is about to take place. This is further exemplified in the positions of his hands, one exposing his betrayer, and the other pointing to the bread, representing the very body of flesh he was offering as a sacrifice. It is no coincidence that the position of Jesus is such that he can see across the very room you are standing in and observe the event of which he is prophesying, his own crucifixion. Though Da Vinci masterfully depicted such an emotionally charged and complex scene, he brings order to the chaos with mathematical precision. This is one of the most mathematically precise paintings in existence, and Da Vinci achieved this by tapping a nail that served as the vanishing point of lines formed by strings, tied to the nail and anchored to the outer edge of the painting. All lines converge on Jesus' temple, making him the center of every interest in the painting. Apparently, the hole from that nail still exists today. There is a vast amount of numerology represented in this painting. Whether Da Vinci was aware of the numerical symbolism in Christianity, he was absolutely aware of the relationship of numbers and the stability they create in his painting. It appears that numerical decisions were made with the most basic understanding that there were 12 disciples plus Jesus. Jesus in the center of the painting creates a division of the 12 into 6 on either side. Each side is then divided into 2 groups of 3, making a total of 4 groups of 3 disciples. These groupings bring a sound order to an emotional scene, but this numerical structure continues on with how the architecture of the room is expressed. Just behind the disciples are 3 doors on either side, separated by 4 tapestries. There are 3 windows behind Jesus. The lattice pattern on the ceiling is made up of 36 rectangular indentations. If a line is drawn vertically in the center of the 36 rectangular shapes, you'll see that there are 3 columns on either side, providing a sound sense of symmetry, bringing even more order to the structure of the painting. The meanings of the numbers as they pertain to the story are certainly left up to interpretation, but you don't have to look far in this biblical story to find them. There are 12 disciples, there are 4 gospel accounts, and 3 is the divine number representing Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. However, specifically in this story, there seems to be a deeper significance to the number 3. It was 3 times that Peter denied Christ before the rooster crowed, and when Jesus told his disciples that they would fall away that night, it was 3 times that they were found sleeping after he asked them to stay awake and stand guard. Even though this painting has been all but demolished and put back together again, it still speaks in a voice that has echoed through the ages and still resonates today. Da Vinci, though he took 3 years on this beloved work, managed to create the most iconic version of a biblical theme that had been painted many times before, during, and after his lifetime. When you ask yourself if it's worth the time and money to see this painting, I can't help but say, of course, if you're going to be in Milan, you should at least try to see the second most famous painting in the world. But of course, as time, money, and availability dictate, this leads to the next part of the video: how to get tickets. Getting tickets to see The Last Supper seems straightforward, but it is not. You can try and get tickets from the official website, but it is nigh impossible. Most of the tickets are sold or snatched up by third-party vendors almost immediately after release, and they only seem to sell to the public 3 months in advance. If you want to see this painting, you will more than likely have to purchase a tour through a service like Viator. That is the service we used, and I really have no complaints, except that we ended up spending $188 for 2 tickets. Even with the high price, I can say that I have no regrets, and it was absolutely worth it. This really was an unforgettable experience, and if you have a love for historical art or Da Vinci, this seems like a must-see for your stay in Milan. Please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Arrivederci.